Larry and I were discussing last night. We were down on Cincinnati's Fountain Square for the New Year's Eve, which is it's been a while since we probably stayed up till midnight. It's definitely been a long time since we've been out.
Yeah, right. So it was at least 1 o'clock by the time we got back in.
So it was a multicultural experience, in that there seemed to be not only a lot of Cincinnati-born or American-born people, but also a lot of people from other cultures based on both, I would say mostly their dress and their language. And it was kind of a reminder that at least since human beings have started keeping time, marking time, which is actually a fairly recent thing, there's something extremely special about New Year's Day. New Year's Eve, New Year's Day.
Yeah, we celebrate that, and if you think about it in terms of just pure logic, what's the big deal? But it is a big deal. We make it a big deal, and so why?
Yeah. So I was also thinking about the fact that it was my 60th birthday on December 24th, and actually New Year's Eve and New Year's Day felt more special to me than my birthday, and it's not because it's December 24th. It's just, I think it's that way for me every year, that it feels like a more significant marker in time to me than does my birthday. And there's something that always feels like I'm starting out fresh the next day, like everything is somehow new.
It's a do-over. I mean, really, it's for me, that sense of it's a do-over. There's lots of things that come to an end on December 31st. We stop counting our annual salary, get ready to pay taxes on what we made, and in preparation of paying taxes on what we're going to make, and trying to figure out how to avoid that as much as possible. But so in a sense, I think we all need that sort of, well, I don't know how else to say it, a do-over, a place to say, okay, I can begin again.
Yeah.
A friend in a church many years ago was celebrating his 50th wedding anniversary, and somebody asked him, what'd your wife get you? And he said, the same thing she got me last year. And he said, what was that? He says, another chance. And I think New Year's Day represents another chance.
So I know I always stop and sort of think about the past year, and I also think about what's coming up and what the potential is. It feels like a potential to me, like an untapped potential, like a moment in time for me that's, I don't know if it's a do-over for me, but it's something about potential and newness being available again. And then, of course, we have this other thing that, at least here in the US, that we've gotten into this habit of, that we call a New Year's resolution.
Yeah, and for me, that's also kind of a starting point. It marks a starting point of some sort, but it's a strange starting point in the sense that when we talk about New Year's resolutions, we all know that in general they don't work.
Yeah,
most people don't get very far into the year before those are all gone.
Yeah, and that's been true for me, and I haven't really set regular resolutions probably in a while now. But I was thinking, as Larry and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, I was thinking, what is it about resolutions that are so problematic? And I wanted to just go back and look at the beginning of the good old-fashioned definition. And so the Google version of defining resolution is, it's a noun, it's a firm decision to do or not do something. And the other definition was the action of solving a problem, dispute, or contentious matter. And neither one of these definitions for me feels like a very positive start.
Yeah, it's really a sort of a look at, okay, so what did I screw up last year? Or what is it about my life that I really need to change?
Or what have I still not done?
Yeah, right. And it's the hopefulness of a new start in some ways can get blemished by the dread or the difficulty of looking at the past and saying, my gosh, why didn't I do that? Or how can I change? How can I make myself, what's wrong with me? And focusing on what's wrong with me and saying, I gotta make this change in my life.
Yeah.
And so,
so it's almost like we think about why New Year's resolutions don't work. I know you have some thoughts from your coaching and NLP experience.
Right. Anytime I want to make a change in my life, I know that it's really easy to make a change if I'm congruent in the desire to change. But there's a part of me that wants to change, but there's also a part of me that doesn't want to change. And the part that doesn't want to change has been in charge for a long time. There is this internal conflict between I want to do this, but I want to do this. And so that's why making changes is difficult. The way we resolve that, I mean, it's, anytime you have a conflict, there are 4 possible outcomes. Especially if Cynthia and I have a conflict, there's I win, she loses. She wins, I lose. We compromise, and from my perspective, that means we both lose. We both give up something, don't really get all that we want. But then there's the potential for a win-win. She gets her way and I get my way. And the way that comes about is by saying, okay, this is what you want. What does that provide for you? What does that get you? And the same thing that I have is it's what does this behavior provide for me that's important? And once I find out what that is, what's important about that, maybe there are other ways of getting it. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's a way that she can get what's important to her and I can get what's important. I have to get beneath the surface conflict to what does that bring to us, and then find a way to get both of those things met.
So when you look at for yourself or for other people wanting to make change, because basically, according to these 2 definitions at least, the resolution is mostly a decision to do or not do something, which means a change state. Right. If you weren't doing it before or you were doing it before, either way, it's a change state. Or the action of resolving a problem, dispute, or contentious matter. You're pretty much saying it actually is an internal dispute.
Right.
And unless you understand it as an internal dispute and work for a win-win, you're going to continue to have trouble.
We're going to continue to have trouble. Also, in addition to that, sometimes, or maybe most of the time, people think they should change, but don't necessarily want to change. Mm-hmm. That makes it even more difficult because who says I should change? Mm-hmm. And it's really difficult to make that change based on somebody else's need or somebody else's want, somebody else's. Say, even my doctor says you've got to lose 10 pounds or 30 pounds or whatever it is. And okay, I recognize that, but I don't really want to change the way I eat. I don't want to change the way I exercise. But the doc says, so I go to I make this New Year's resolution. I'm going to lose 30 pounds. Then I have to decide how, but it's not that I really want to. It's because I kind of got to. And most of us understand that response, that resistance creates resistance. Mm-hmm. And so somebody says, I want to change, I want you to change, and the other person says, no. One of my favorite, counseling jokes is, change is good, you go first. And
it's a classic of yours.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Well, the more we talked about it, I would get to think about all the failures of New Year's resolutions, and something that my brother wrote and I shared on Facebook also about, if you fall off or you fail, you just get back if you do it again. Try not to go into a bunch of castigating yourself.
Guilt and self-flagellation.
Right. But the truth of the matter is I think the more I think about New Year's resolutions, I suspect the majority of us come at them from a place of shame.
Right.
It's actually shame is the underlying issue or the base off of which we're trying to make that change. And if shame is the underlying base of which we're trying to make that change, then it seems to me that when we make a resolution, we're really feeding, accidentally, we're feeding the shame-based state instead of our potential.
Yeah, think about the internal dialogue that happens when you relapse, for example, when you break the rule that you had just set. There's this internal dialogue that says, oh, there you go again, just like your old self, just the way it's always been. And you feel more and more guilt, more and more shame. And it simply reinforces the bad feeling that gets associated with the good resolution. You reinforce, this just makes me feel bad, just makes me feel worse. And so, at some point, you give up.
Right. And you're going to fail at some point. And the problem isn't that you're going to fail. The problem is that what your reaction when you fail is going to be, which is going to be to spiral back into that shame-based place again. So it's a conundrum, and I wonder what in the world could we do, to change the underlying shame base.
One of the things that we do in NLP is say that there are no such things as failure; there are only feedback. So I can say, well, that didn't work. Then I need to try something else. What triggered the behavior that I didn't want to have happen? What brought that about? What was I doing at the time? Is there something that I need to do differently? Is there, if I want to lose 30 pounds, it's probably not a good idea to bring home 5 gallons of ice cream and a dozen.
Yeah, I hate using weight as our example, though.
Well,
I got to be honest,
but
because that's such a huge one for so many people. So if we said instead that we were talking about working out, or maybe we want to meditate every day. So that shouldn't be such a big deal to set a resolution to meditate every day. But if our basic underlying premise is that there's something wrong with us,
right,
and something deeply wrong with us, then it's going to be a problem in terms of what we feed is what tends to grow more. So I want to just stop for a second here and say thanks to the people who joined us. And Arwa, thank you for your statement that you decided to take pressure off yourself this year and not put out a list and just to do your best in life. And I think that's a fabulous approach, frankly. I think there's another reason that we have to be careful that some of us never set resolutions. And I think that some of us that never set any kind of opportunity for change could very well be trying to avoid the feeling of shame. And so whether we recognize it and we avoid it, recognize it, don't recognize it, avoid it, or we make a resolution and then accidentally trigger all those feelings of not being able to do what it is that we set out to do. We have no willpower. We're just, another pathetic person, blah, 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 blah,
right,
blah. There's something very unique about that conversation in most of our heads, actually.
Right. And again, it's not like it's a failure, it's feedback. What didn't work? What do I need to change? What do I need to be aware of? And also, New Year's resolutions tend to, I think, I distinguish between them and goal setting for the year.
Yeah, I think we'll have 2 more talks like this week, and then one of them we're going to talk about is goal setting, perhaps. And I think it's very different than goal setting.
Right, absolutely, yeah. And because, this has to do with frequently, not always, frequently has to do with a change in lifestyle.
yeah, a change in behavior,
Yeah.
a very underlying change. Most of us often choose something extremely underlying and deep. So I'd like to go back to this idea of working with shame, and because I think it's really key that we each find some kind of approach to working with shame that works for us, and then would provide us some opportunity for creating changes from a different base in the future, creating different resolutions, if you wanted to call them resolutions. I'm not sure you'd use that word anymore, though, to be honest, if we'd all let go of the shame-based state.
I want to make sure that we understand, or that, just let me say how I make the distinction between shame and guilt. Guilt is I did something that was wrong. Shame is I am something that is wrong. It has to do with identity, who I am, and self-image. And so the real issue is about shame is how does one begin to transform that?
Right.
Yeah. How does one begin to have a different picture, understanding, an experience of themselves, with the realization that we've, in some sort of spiritual term, been created to be who we are.
Right.
And
what you and I often talk about is not being broken. That nobody's broken. We're not broken. We're fine. We're fine. Totally fine. And then it's just a matter of it, from that fine state, being able to claim the right to continue to grow and develop that we all are just born with.
Yeah, that's a really important issue. When I think about my past, I think about the fact that oh, you know what, I was that way, but I had to be there to get here. I have to be where I am to get where I'm going in terms of my own personal development and the way I relate to people. So it's a journey. I haven't reached its end, and I assume that in this lifetime, I'm going to continue to develop and grow until I take my last breath.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, working with shame-based issues, the major ways that I have worked with that have been through my internal dialogue, and I've done that both very internal, but I've also found it to be extremely valuable that there is a component that's visible to it, if that makes any sense. So Larry can talk about in a minute about visualization and imagery, which he does a lot of work with. I certainly do that. We all do some version of that. Usually the version that we're doing is not so nice about ourselves. So when we actually set aside some possibility to engage our internal dialogue in a different way, then we're changing up our behavior. But I believe we can do it extremely effectively if we're highly persistent. I think about the Michael, what is that guy's name that does that whole program on pain? And he talks about working with the brain and changing it. You have to be persistent and relentless. And so, yeah. So, what was his name?
Well, he wrote Dowd wrote the book. Deutsch, I mean.
No, I'm not talking about Deutsch. I'm talking about John or Michael that did the mirror neuron technique. I can't remember his name anyway. And he talks about the importance of being relentless and persistent. Well, when I was really dealing with big shame issues, which is a few years ago now, but thankfully, I got to tell you, that's kind of nice. One of the things that I did was a lot of work with affirmations. Now, people make fun of affirmations, and I love the old Saturday Night Live skit where you sit in front of the mirror, and the one with Michael Jordan trying to say to himself, and doggone it, I love me too, and all that. I mean, I think, I understand the funniness of affirmations, but I actually think that they can work extremely well when you take your internal dialogue. When you do writing, you can do writing between the left and right hand, one hand representing the younger you, because it's not an older you, it's not a mature you. it was not a mature me that was experiencing the experience of shame. I see I was getting way off the screen here. I gotta bring myself back on. That was experiencing shame. And the part of you inside that is not getting enough voice, which is really the more mature me, the more mature you, and having dialogue back and forth. I found that, so let's say that, I'm trying to think what may be, let's say that the New Year's resolution is to get fit, but basically I think I'm just a schlemiel that's never been able to do anything, and I'll never be able to make that happen. So you will know your own internal dialogue, but there's something else that you want to be willing to believe about yourself. And so let's say that's something else that you want to be willing to believe. And you notice I did not say, I believe this. I want to be willing to believe this. So this is an NLP technique that I would say credit to Larry. So I would actually write out things like, I couldn't get myself to write, I am a fit, vibrant human being. I couldn't, let's say I couldn't write that. That was so upsetting to me as an idea that I couldn't write it. I would write, I am willing to be willing, to be willing, to be willing. I would write as many willing to be willings as I needed to before I could get myself to write down that sentence, vibrant, viable human being, blah, 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 whatever it was. And then as I worked with it, I could start dropping off willings. So maybe the first time that I felt I went to write it, I felt nausea and thought to myself, I'm not even going to be able to put this down. And then it turns out if I put in 7 willings, I can get myself to put it down. And then as I do it each day, I found that I could drop off willings. And I'd have a whole series of things around the particular area that I was working with, that of what I wanted to tell myself. And then I would also reinforce that with other artistic creative aspects. So it would be through collage making or working with clay, things like that, so that I was really working it in a very multidimensional way. I'll talk about how I think the Feldenkrais work works with it a little bit too in a second.
Yeah, there was what she was talking about, I'm willing to be willing, is interesting. Also, take the, if you take the statement that you currently believe about yourself, like I'll never succeed, and write, I'm open to doubt that I will never succeed. That's another thing. One of the things
way of removing yourself.
Yeah. So I can be, first of all, willing to be willing, but secondly, I'm open to doubt.
To just doubting that belief. I like that. That could even be another way of distancing yourself, or what you would call a dissociation.
Dissociative state. So she was talking about visualization. One of the things that's very useful is to, so who's the person that you want to be, or what is the behavior that you want to do automatically without trying? And you make an internal image of yourself doing that. And for example, I might say, okay, I see the Larry over there that continually or consistently does such and such, the behavior that I want. And I see him doing it perfectly, naturally, comfortably, perhaps even without thinking about it. And then I actually step into that Larry, sort of wiggle around and get him to fit in there, and notice how that feels. Now, this sounds, logically, this doesn't make much sense, but neurologically, with what I want to talk about, brain pathways, etc., something happens. Now, it may not be instantaneous, but if you do that consistently for a while, you begin to take on that behavior. And as with the Feldenkrais and helping people in their movements, they want to be able to help people to move in such a way that it's just natural, easy flowing without effort. And NLP wants people to have the kinds of behaviors and attitudes that they want at a natural, without effort. It just comes automatically on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I do think that for me, the Feldenkrais work also helped me to release shame, because as I experienced awareness through movement lessons, I think this happened much, much more in group classes for me than it did in private sessions. As I experienced the group awareness through movement lessons, what I found is that every one of us were having different experiences in the room. We were all doing movements differently. I could look around the room and see that we were doing them differently, and that there wasn't really a right or wrong way. There were ways that felt better or less not pleasant. There were uniquenesses to each of our structures that made certain things more or less possible, or different ways of interpreting. And so there was something about that non-judgmentalness that allowed me to get it also on a more bodily level, perhaps, that came, I think, came through that work for me as well. So I think it doesn't matter what you choose, but one thing that you could think about is, if you're somebody who has been making resolutions and finding yourself disillusioned with it, or already starting to imagine when are you going to fall off the wagon before you've even started, that perhaps you could give yourself a break and, number one, not make one.
Right. Yeah, if you don't make them, you can't break them.
Yeah. But to acknowledge the fact that the desire to want to continue to grow and develop is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a fabulous thing. We don't want to discourage that.
Yeah, I would. No, I want
maybe. Yeah.
I want to build on that. I think the affirmation is, I'm okay.
Mm.
Now, I may change. I may make some changes. I'm free to make changes, but I'm okay. I am okay just the way I am. And to be able to accept that, to recognize I'm on a journey, and I'm not what I was 5 years ago. I'm not what I was 2 years ago. I'm not what I'm going to be 2 years from now. And then, if there are specific areas of your life that you want to make changes in, do things like the visualization and the writings and all of that.
Well, start with that.
Don't beat yourself up.
Right. Start with that base of I am okay. That's really, that's the theme of today's talk with us, is can you start from that base? And that's the most important aspect. Then everything else, I think, can kind of start to take care of itself. So we're going to talk about some other strategies and ways later in the week. And maybe we'll even figure out how to stream this into our groups by then. But if you were imagine this was the end of a Saturday Night Live skit, we would look at the mirror, or we'd look at each other and we'd say, I'm okay.
Doggone it, I'm a good person.
I like me. And I like me.
Yeah, right.
So with that note, Larry and I think you're okay.
No, we know you're okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I know you're okay. Yeah, you may want to tweak it, but
yeah. So you're okay. I'm okay. I think that was the title of a fabulous book. and as we wrap up here, I'm going to say, yes, thank you, Kathy, for saying I am okay and for tuning in. And yes, so we're going to do another one in a couple of days, and I think we've got some cool things to keep sharing with you on this topic. So thanks so much. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your New Year's Day, and just bask in potential.
Bye-bye. See you later.